Are people just sicker than they were year on year on year? I've been predicting this for a long time and stating that the population is getting worse. And as you can see here on the screen, I am looking at the January 2026 statistical commentary looking at accident and emergency attendances and admissions in hospitals across the UK. This is important information. And what we are trying to understand is whether or not predictions about the population with ongoing circulation of SARS-CoV-2 in highly vaccinated regions, is this relevant to why so many people are getting sick? There's some details that you need to understand in order to grasp what I'm talking about. The first thing is that there are three types of emergency departments. And if you look over here, Type 1. This is technically the emergency department, that if you are in a car accident or had a heart attack, it's consultant-led 24-hour service with full resuscitation facilities. That's the main accident and emergency people think of. Then you have Type 2. These are single specialty, ophthalmology, dental. They're not quite the same emergency department, they're quite specialized. And Type 3 are urgent treatment centers. They are usually led by GPs and open at least 12 hours a day, every day. And if someone is very sick, they will often get referred from an urgent treatment center into a Type 1 A&E department. This is very important. And so when we are looking at these statistics, you will then understand why each section is so relevant in understanding where we are at the moment. So, as I said, this is the January 2026 statistical commentary. When we look at attendances, you can see here that it is 4.6% higher when compared to January 2025. So this is across all of the departments, Type 1, Type 2, Type 3. The Type 1 A&E departments are 5.6% higher when compared to January of 2025. Attendances at Type 3 are 3% higher. So year on year, there is a significant increase in attendances across all the departments. Now, interestingly, when we look at Type 1 A&E departments, this is your main accident and emergency, the growth over the last 3 months compared to the same period was 2.3% higher. These are critical pieces of information. So we can see the usage seems to be up. But here is an interesting statistic, because people are attending but not necessarily getting admitted. What does that mean? So when you look now at emergency admissions, there is a decrease of 0.5% compared to January of 2025. More people are coming, less people are being admitted. Similarly, when we look at the emergency departments, Type 1 A&E departments, the admissions are 1.2% lower. Now that's very interesting. What it means is that more people are unwell, more people are probably struggling to see their doctor or their GP, and therefore more people are turning up at accident and emergencies to try and get solutions. They are then not admitted and discharged. So the pressure on the system is increasing. Why are people struggling to be able to see their doctors? Largely because their doctors, GPs, are being overwhelmed. More people in the community are sick. They have so many things wrong with them. And this is part of the point. There doesn't seem to be an answer to help people who are struggling at present with chronic illness post-COVID. In order to get beyond this, you really have to understand what is going on. And I am just using the statistics to demonstrate to you, if you understand this challenge, why it is that you are not on your own. We're looking for solutions, but you have to recognize that this is not just you. This is across the board. When we look at now in terms of, although the admissions are in, attendances are increasing, admissions are decreasing, there's a bit of important information you have to look at. Here we are talking about the 4-hour delay from decision to admit. Now, what this means, when you decide that someone is unwell enough, that means that they can't go home. They are too unwell to go home. You then keep them in hospital. And when that decision is made to admit them into hospital and refer them to whatever specialty is appropriate, at that point, the clock starts. So when you look at this image, 4-hour delays from decision to admit, that's an increase of 1% from January 2025. Why would there be a delay? Because there aren't enough beds in the hospital. Now, this is the bit that you wouldn't understand if you didn't see how hospitals work. When somebody needs to be admitted, they need a bed on a ward. In order for them to get a bed, say for an acute medical unit, there have to be beds available in the rest of the hospital for patients to move, so that you can move patients from accident and emergency into a bed, an admitted bed in the hospital. What they're seeing is that 4-hour time frame, which is the target, once the decision has been made, the patient should be moved into a bed within 4 hours. They are struggling. There's an increase of 1% because that means the hospital is full. You may think that it could be other factors, but I'm going to demonstrate to you why it's definitely related to the hospital being full. When you look at the next line, 12 hours from decision to admit, that is an increase of 16.2% from January of 2025. Think about this. 4 hours is the target. That's still a good period of time for somebody to be on a trolley in accident and emergency before they get into a bed if they are sick. 12 hours, that is a huge amount of time. That's when you see trolleys stacked up in accident and emergencies. There are just not enough beds. They can't send the patient home, and they don't have a bed on a ward available for this patient to go into. A 16.2% increase year on year. This means that people are sick in hospital and hospitals can't discharge them. So your output, where people are already in hospital, need to be discharged, and very often are waiting on support services in the community, whether or not it's packages of cares, beds in care homes. They can't get them out because the resources are not there. And so you have a backup of the system. It's almost like being constipated. If you don't move stuff out, when you eat, it will eventually make you sick because it can't move through the intestine. We need that flow through in hospitals in order to be able to have capacity for patients to come into new beds and be managed. What does this indicate? A few things. One, attendances are up. More people are sick. But they're not necessarily very sick. They don't need to be admitted. Of the people who need to be admitted, the delays to admit them are up. So even though there are less people than in 2025, 0.5%, they can't get a bed because there are already too many people in the inn. This is the critical piece of the puzzle. What we are seeing across the board is a sicker population, a more frail population, especially in the older cohorts. And this then has a knock-on effect onto the whole system. The reason I'm highlighting this is because this is predictable. When we look at the outcomes from Denmark, They found that patients who were admitted just with a positive COVID infection, just an infection, not necessarily unwell, within 14 days of admission, there was a 12% mortality within 30 days. This is 3 times worse than what would happen if it was influenza. We are witnessing at population level a degree of illness that is driving the whole system down into the ground. It seems that no one wants to acknowledge this. But if you don't acknowledge it, you have little chance of being able to mitigate it. Truth is that even with acknowledgement, what do? You can't make packages of care any faster. You can't create more care homes. But if there is an anticipation that this pressure will continue week on week, month on month, year on year, there is a chance to put more resources or become more creative in how you manage it. This is the reality that we have to face. There is no way out of this, and I suspect that this is what is happening across the board in Western countries that are highly vaccinated. You may wonder why I keep on mentioning that. The reality is that when I looked at what I call the COVID storm, COVID reinfection in an immune system that is already primed, ideally or primarily through vaccination, you then get an outcome that is way beyond or way worse than if there was just natural infection. My point is simple. We have to mitigate some of the mistakes that were made in the pandemic. One of them being that we vaccinated too broadly. We should have targeted our vaccination campaigns on the high risk and those who were not infected. Some people may disagree with this, and that's fine. But you have to look at the outcomes that we are facing now, because they still need to be addressed, and there is no way to ignore it for much longer. Keep aware of what is going on. Trust those who give you the facts and try and explain in detail what it is they are thinking. These are my opinions, my analysis, and so you can take it as you will. But I predict that in 2027, this is going to be worse.